chance to grab something to drink and kind of stretch your legs before we have our last wonderful speaker. First of all, my name is Jackie Posek. I work in the Office of Catholic Campus Ministry, along with Rob Gilmore and Katie Sullivan, who were the two previous moderators. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Terry Nelson Johnson, who is the resident theologian and animator of faith, that's quite a title, at Old St. Patrick's Catholic Church in Chicago. And he does a great deal of speaking in many different places. He just got back from 12 days in Canada. Through storytelling, poetry, and humor, Dr. Nelson Johnson challenges us to enter more deeply into the mystery of grace, the mystery of spirit, and the mystery of God. Author and leader of the acclaimed Beloved Retreat, Terry works with parents, teachers, pastoral staff, and members of faith communities across the country, and in other countries, to design and conduct formation programs that encourage, affirm, and inspire. A prolific writer, his reflections and essays have been widely published in local and national publications. Terry served on Loyola Academy Jesuit High School faculty for 18 years, and is founder and executive director of Soul Play, LLC, an experiential theological educational enterprise serving congregations, families, schools, and adult retreats. Resident theologian and animator of faith at Old St. Patrick's Church, he holds a master's degree from the Institute of Pastoral Studies at Loyola University here in Chicago, and a doctorate of ministry from the University of St. Mary of the Lake. So without further ado, please welcome Terry Nelson Johnson.
Hi, everybody. Okay, here we go. What a pleasure to be here. I was able to rearrange my schedule in order to come back. And one of the reasons I wanted to come back and be here was, this is my dad's alma mater. And he would have turned 100 2 years ago. And he got to DePaul on a basketball scholarship. Both his parents had died. He was living in one single efficiency room in the neighborhood. And they took his basketball scholarship after the first year because they had some really tall guys coming in the next year. And so he went to the athletic department and he said, I see that Loyola University, you know, the Jesuits, they have a tennis team and you don't. And the athletic director said, yeah, we just don't, we don't have the resources yet, but we will. And my dad said, well, I was the city champion in tennis for 3 years. I'll coach and I'll do the laundry and I'll play and I'll recruit if you'll give me my scholarship back. And they did. And so he finished his undergraduate here and then he got his law degree from DePaul and he was really proud of it. He ended up being on the board of trustees. So I'm the youngest of 7 kids. So to be at his place, which he always spoke of with great affection, means a great deal to me. So I have way more than I could ever do in the 30 minutes that we have allowed. So this is going to be a little bit like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. I was at a talk at Old St. Pat's where I work, and Pat McGrath, who's the president of Loyola Academy at Jesuit High School, said, hey, would anybody like me to define Catholicism in 3 words? And in order to understand my enthusiasm, you'd have to be appraised that I have severe ADD. And for complicated reasons, I can't take the medication, so I'm like a walking ADD poster child. And I thought to myself, when you have ADD like I do, and you have to take the test, and I'm a professional Catholic, so I still have to take the test occasionally, it's unbelievably anxiety-provoking, because you just assume this is not going to go well. And so I thought, if I could just memorize these 3 words, I can just repeat them on the Catholic test and get like partial credit. So I'm like, yeah, define Catholicism in 3 words. And so he says, Catholicism, grace, mediation, sacrament. And I didn't have to memorize it because I think of my ADD as 2/3 gift, 1/3 affliction. And the affliction is real, but so is the gift. And so one of the gifts of my ADD is things penetrate me. They don't have to get through a lot to get to my core. And so I immediately sort of ingested that definition, Catholicism, grace, mediation, sacrament. And as I understand it, what it suggests is that the Catholic imagination, not to the exclusion of anybody, or as though we have the market cornered for God's sake, but the Catholic imagination believes that we are in the presence of a God that desperately wants to get to us. And I'll be honest with you, my hope is that I do not like to come to something that can remotely be called church and have everybody leave in the exact same condition they arrived in. You know what I'm saying? That is not good church. If I'm going to gather with people who are gracious enough to convene, and I know that some of you are here under duress, but still, the fact that we're together, My hope is that somebody leaves here different than when they arrived. It's the only reason I ever do church, is that somebody gets messed with, provoked, comforted, healed, something for God's sake. You get together, you call a church, everybody leaves in the exact same condition. Like, are you kidding me? So, the Catholic imagination believes that we are in the presence of a God that desperately wants to get to us, almost like a boxer with that sheen on his face, not to get to you to hurt you, but to get to you to liberate, to heal, to transform something. So that's the first piece, the grace part. The sacrament part, with a small s, is a felt experience of God's presence. Right? So all God wants, all God wants is to get grace to us, is to get to us. When God is successful doing the only thing God wants to do, the Catholic imagination calls that a sacrament. And one way to think about it is, it's a felt experience of God's presence. And so one way to interact with Catholics, although it makes them very nervous, is to ask them, how many sacraments have you received today and under what circumstances? And they'll all be nervous and say, well, I don't really attend church regularly. I'm like, I didn't ask you if you went to church. I didn't ask if you went to a building. I asked you if you received a little bit of God's person, God's presence, God's Spirit. That's a sacrament, a felt experience of God's presence. The middle part is the most Catholic part because it's mediation, and I have to sort of break into my Michael Jackson routine. So grace is over here, we're over here, God wants to get to us. How does God get to us? God is mediating. It's almost like the mediation is like a piece of copper. And so the Catholic imagination believes you can't just mainline God. I would like some God now, like, well, good luck on that. The way that we imagine God getting to us is through Lake Michigan, for God's sake, or poetry, or bread baking, or dancing, or really great music, or a bike ride along the lake, or an actual intimate conversation with another human being, or lovemaking, or singing, whatever. That we believe that God gets to us through all the stuff, So, the focus of my time with you is the prospect of God getting to us through the reality of reconciliation. And not necessarily ritual reconciliation, although that's an unbelievably beautiful expression of it. Hopefully I'll have some time to make some connections. But I hope most people got this little teeny handout. And let me sort of contextualize the rest of what I'd like to say with this little handout. And so, if you were going to imagine, well, what is sin or hell, and you were going to ask me to define it, I would suggest that sin or hell would involve, this is not an all-encompassing list, but I think it would include alienation, isolation, lack of passion or a dream, untended hurt, self-consciousness, undue self-consciousness, suspicion, quick to judge, anger at the ready, indifference, avoidance of intimacy, the best defense is a good offense, shame, risk averse, lacking hope, curiosity, warmth, tenderness, compassion, creativity, life-giving sexuality, inability to laugh or weep without cynicism or apology, unavailable, undue anxiety, habitual weariness, fear, failure to thrive. You'll notice that there were no little bad acts listed there. Like, oh, I can't believe you did that. Sin is not so much those little bad things that we do, quote unquote. Sin is a place that we live. And I would define the place with these words. And if that's a definition of sin, and I were to ask who here is living in sin, and we wanted to be honest, a lot of us would raise our hands. And not because we're bad, just because our relationship with life is such that we have ended up sort of allowing ourselves to be relegated to this place of non-life. David Steiner-Ross says, hey, could I just remind you that the fact that you're not yet dead is not sufficient proof that you're alive? You know what I'm saying? That was sort of fun. The fact that you're not yet dead is not sufficient proof that you're alive. You know when a kid stops moving and he's 2 years old, you know what they do? They bring him to the hospital, and then they go through all the tests, and then the person says there's nothing physically wrong with him. I think he's suffering from failure to thrive. Do you know how many DePaul students are suffering from failure to thrive? And I'm not judging, I'm just saying. And as somebody who is passionate about relationship with God, that saddens me. It's tragic to me. Most suicides are not dramatic. And if anybody's paying attention, that should have somebody's forehead at least crinkle up. Like, how could a suicide not be dramatic? You know why they're not dramatic? Because most of them take about 27 years. They're all tragic. All suicides are tragic. But most people that commit suicide, it takes them about 31 years. They just stop taking risks. They stop being engaged. They stop being passionate. They just take notes and stuff. You know, like, oh. Mary Oliver, a beautiful American poet, says, listen, listen, are you breathing just a little and calling it a life? Oh, God, please. Listen, are you breathing just a little and calling it a life? Do you know what that is? No, that's people who are living in sin. How's it going? Well, I have insurance, good. My airbags work, good. And I changed the batteries in my smoke alarm. Oh, that is great. What a life. Go for it. You just keep doing that every year. You know, I hope you have insurance. I hope your airbags work. And I hope you have new batteries in your smoke alarm. But really, that's the good life? Are you kidding me? There must be something more than alienation, isolation, lack of passion, or a dream. Like right now in this room, there's not a whole lot of energy. I understand that. It's late, it's hot. A lot of you guys had to come here, blah, 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 whatever. I revere energy. I detest, I loathe. If you're an English person, give me some synonyms for detest and loathe, and I will start using them. I do not like to spend much time in the absence of energy. It infuriates me. Like, why would I waste my time in the absence of energy? And so the opposite of alienation or sin is grace or heaven, and obviously it would just be almost just the reverse of the first. So grace or heaven, I think, could be defined, again, not all-inclusive, but it would include things like hope, energy, innocence, compassion, curiosity, trust, availability, unself-consciousness, warmth, wonder, awe, surprise, joy, gratitude, deep-rooted sense of self as loved, valued, welcomed, freedom to laugh and weep without constraint, open to risk, life-giving sexuality, peace, generosity of spirit and resources, courage, humility, intimacy, passion, suffering is redemptive, communion, holy communion. And you know, there's that line in the real estate business, and it just says location, location, location. And so my question to you is, if you had a choice between living in heaven and hell, what would you choose? It's not even a rhetorical question, like seriously. Read the list. Where would you like to live, sir? Me too. How is it that so many people, this, you know, when I say people are living in sin, I don't want anybody to go like, oh my God, I feel so much shame. Like, that's the last thing I want. I just want people to consider, like, is that how you want to spend the next 30 years of your life? Is sort of feeling like that. So the question is, do we believe in a God that desperately wants us to abide in that place called heaven grace? And I, you know, for what it's worth, that's the God that I'm in a relationship with. Not that I always cooperate necessarily, but it's the God that I'm in a relationship with. I'm a storyteller. I come from a clan. I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And those 7 kids subsequently had 33 kids. My wife and I only contributed 2, so we're sort of slackers. And then those 33 kids so far have had 72 kids. So my parents are the grandparents and great-grandparents of 105 and counting. And so when you have that many kids in your family, you know, you do a lot of dishes after parties, so you have to become a storyteller just to, like, bide the time. So let me just share a couple stories that hopefully will give this idea, this theory of heaven and hell some traction. Cardinal Bernardin was, he was beloved cardinal of Chicago, and really, I think, a really, really beautiful man. He contracted cancer, went through one bout of it, the cancer relented, and then it returned pretty aggressively. And they were just doing stuff to basically keep him in comfort because they knew he was going to die, and he knew he was going to die. And so he would go to do some treatments at World University Medical Center out in Maywood, and they would have him come in the basement so no one would see him or bother him, and then he would go to his treatments, but he would always ask to leave via the cancer ward and the Alzheimer's ward. And I heard him tell the story on himself, which is really beautiful. So he goes into the Alzheimer's ward, and he's wearing like his cardinal-y stuff, and he was never ostentatious, so it was relatively modest, but Catholic cardinals wear a special garb that has red piping, and a small red skull cap, and a larger cross, sometimes tucked into the breast pocket. And so he's talking to one of the Alzheimer's patients, and they talk for a couple minutes, and then Cardinal Bernardin really tenderly says to the man, he says, "Do you know who I am?" And the guy says, "No, I don't know you. I don't even know who I am. Go ask that nurse. She knows who everybody is. She'll remind you who you are." So he's on an Alzheimer's ward. He asks the guy who he is. The guy's like, "No, I don't know. I don't even know who I am." But if you go ask that nurse, she knows everybody. She'll remind you who you are. You know who you are, dude? You are somebody who belongs in grace. I mean, for what it's worth. It's my deep, deep conviction. Sir, grace, grace, grace. We're built. Our destiny is to live in this place. Read those adjectives. I think that's where we're built to live. And to the extent that we don't live there, we're in relationship with a God, those of you who believe in God, whatever, who is sort of begging us, like, come on, come home, come home. You don't belong here. It's a beautiful parable by a guy named G.K. Chesterton. Some of you are familiar with him. And Chesterton tells the story. He says, the parable is a guy dies. Everybody that knows the guy assumes he goes to hell. Nobody argues with the premise, you know? Except the guys that drink with him in the tavern 4 or 5 nights a week. And they get together the week after the guy died, and they've heard everybody saying, yeah, he went to hell, whatever. And then they're like, you know, I don't think he belongs in hell. I mean, people didn't know him. He was generous. We're the only people that I think know this guy was actually generous. How much money did he lend us? Did he come to your mom's funeral? And they were all talking, they're like, I don't think he belongs in hell. So they said, we should go to hell and just let him know that we don't think Billy belongs in hell. So they're like, yeah, let's go. You know, and they've been drinking a little bit, so they had a little more, you know, liquid courage. So they go down to hell. And then, but the gates of hell, you know, they're intimidating. You know, they're like big, like they can eat you. So they all stop like 20 yards from hell, and then they send one of their guys out, like as a spokesman, and then he turns into like a 17-year-old, his voice cracks, you know, and they're like, yeah, tell him about Billy. He's like, hi, we're here on behalf of Bill, and yeah, you know, we're together a couple nights a week, you know, at an establishment, and we just wanted to put in a good word for him, and we're not sure that he really, you know, belongs in hell. He was generous in ways that few people knew, and anyway, we're just here on his behalf. And if you need some, you know, if he needs some recommendations, you know, you can contact us. And then they all run away because they're scared they're going to be sucked in. So then his lawyer comes down, and he's dressed all like a lawyer. He's got the lawyer thing going and the briefcase. It's like, I represent William, and it's true that he had a couple issues, but I think if we had 6 more months, we would have resolved those to everyone's satisfaction. And I just don't think hell is the appropriate residence for William, you know, for what it's worth. I'll leave my card unless I can serve anybody here. He also stops at the 20-yard mark, you know, in fear of being sucked into hell. So then he drops his card, he goes away. Then his pastor comes down. His pastor's like, William's part of my congregation, and it's true that we don't see him on a weekly basis, but he does send his stipend in electronically, so that's a good thing. And William and I were in correspondence, and I think there was a lot of reconciliation that may actually transpire. And so I just wanted to say on behalf of the church that I'm not sure William belongs here. And he also stays at the 20-yard mark because he's scared too. And then Billy's mom comes down. She's older, looks frail, but she's fierce. And she walks right past that 20-yard mark. She walks right up to these unbelievably intimidating gates of hell. And she just says, let me in. And the gates of hell swing open. And then this mom walks in. She says, I'm here for Billy. Anybody seen Billy? Yeah, he's in the back in a fetal position. It's like, okay. So the mom goes back and she snuck in a warm, wet washcloth. And she gets to Billy, who's sweaty. She sits down next to him and just starts to wipe his face. And then she pulls his son, awkward son, who's in hell, you know, isolated, alienated, non-belonging, no energy, etc. Read the hell thing. And then she just says, Billy, you don't belong here. You come with me, Billy. Okay. Come with me. And then she's desperate. Please. I mean, if you were a mom and you had a kid that was residing in those characteristics, what would you do? Just leave him there? Like, oh yeah, you can stay in hell if you want. Are you kidding me? You don't belong there. You're a human being. You should have energy. You should know yourself as valued, precious. If there is a God and there's an element of God who is a mother, you don't think that mother's going to go down to hell and say to the gates of hell, let me in. And then go in and try to escort that her son out. Oh, man. Sorry to get these. Okay. So many stories, so little time. So my mom died, if you asked her how old she was 2 days before she died, she would have said to you, I'm 97 3/4. She loved saying 3/4. And after you're 90, you can, when people ask you your age, you can say whatever you want, you know what I'm saying? So she says she's 97 3/4. She was in hospice for 18 months. Hospice is the organization that accompanies you as you die. In terms of insurance, you're only supposed to be in hospice for 6 months, but she kept like resurrecting prematurely. And I was like, Mom, you have to die and then resurrect. Die and then resurrect. But she kept like resurrecting too soon. Like, dude, you gotta like lay down longer. So she's 97 3/4, and we promised her we'd keep her at home as best we could. And we hired 2 people to alternate 3 days on, 4 days off, etc. And then her 7 kids would come in and augment all of that. And one of the women taking care of her was from Ghana, and she arrived in Chicago with a cardboard box and $20. And then she took care of people like my mom. And her name is Esther. She's Muslim. And so at one point my mom came to me and said, Terry, what is Esther doing at 4:15 in the morning in the hallway? I'm like, she's praying, Mom. She's Muslim, pray 5 times a day. She has a prayer mat, she has a shawl. My mom says, that's ridiculous. Have her come and pray right next to my bed. It's like, Mom, she wants to get her prayers done before you wake up. You wake up about 5:15. She's like, we can pray together, can't we? I'm like, okay, whatever. Esther, would you mind taking your prayer mat and praying next to Mom? She's like, sure. So about 10 days later, I go over to my mom. I'm like, Mom, how are you? She's like, do you want to learn some Muslim prayers? And then she says, and you should ask Esther because she can do the whole rosary. So Esther teaches my mom some of her Muslim prayers, and my mom teaches Esther the rosary. The night my mom was dying, I was holding her sort of like the Pieta, and she was very agitated. She weighed about 65 pounds, and she was in a diaper. And I'm her youngest son, and I had the privilege of holding her while she died. And I was anguished because I thought if anybody in the world deserved death of peace, it was my mom, and it wasn't happening that way. And Esther was also upset, and she said, and she and I were the only people there, and she said, we should say the rosary. Your mom loves the rosary, and that'll calm her down. I'm like, okay, Esther, good idea. And so Esther says, I'll go get her favorite rosary. I'm like, good. So Esther goes and gets my mom's favorite rosary. She respectfully hands the rosary to me. I have an unbelievably deep regard in my imagination for the feminine dimension of God, especially as it's expressed through Mary, but I have not maintained the rosary as one of my personal means of prayer. So now Esther hands me the rosary, which is, iconically Catholic, as about as Catholic as it gets, and I'm upset because I'm holding my mom who's dying, and I don't know what to do. And Esther looks at my face, and she waits for me to start. Then she realizes that I'm in a little bit of a bind here. And then the Muslim woman reaches, she takes the rosary, and then she leads the rosary as though she were the president of the Altar Rosary Society. And my mom calmed down, and then she just died in my arms while the Muslim woman is praying the Catholic prayer. And I just wanted all of the United Nations to come into that room, and I wanted to say to them, it could work. It could work. What are we going to have, another war over religion? Are you kidding me? That's so perverted. What do you have to protect something here? What you got to be right? Come on. Reconciliation, homecoming, come home, come home. It's big enough. Love is big, it's huge. It can get its arms around hell for God's sake. Oh man, I love that moment. Maybe 2 more and then invite you guys to jump in. So, my wife, for our 25th wedding anniversary, she's like, hey, I'm going to take you to the most romantic bed and breakfast west of the Mississippi. I'm like, sweet. Sweet. So, and she tells me all about it. So the most romantic, in case you want to take notes on this, the most romantic bed and breakfast, apparently west of the Mississippi, is in Taos, New Mexico. So we go to Taos, and it's the Southwest, so it's all like Southwesty. Toned down colors, and everything's natural, and everything's outside, a lot of animals, flowers, blah, blah, blah. So we go to the breakfast part of bed and breakfast, and you're paying a gazillion amount of money, so when they say bed and breakfast, the breakfast has to be very fancy. So they come out, and there's flowers floating and everything, and the wife does all the work, and the husband does the schmoozing thing, like, where do you want to go today, blah, blah, blah. So the guy comes to our table, and then he talks forever. And I'm a talker, I can get that. But I'm like, dude, this is our 25th wedding anniversary, and you are dominating our breakfast conversation. And he was sort of bothering me. And then he had a dog that was a large dog, and it was with him at all times, which means the dog is now with us at breakfast. And I'm a dog person, but still, don't they have any public health rules in Taos? So the dog's face is right on top of the breakfast, You're going to eat the floating flowers. Like, what is going on here? So, by the end of it, my wife goes like, man, that guy's bugging you. I'm like, yeah, that's our wedding anniversary. Next day, the same thing. And she's like, calm down, it's going to be okay. So the next day, he's like, I can't spend much time with you today because there's another couple. I'm like, thank God for them. So the guy goes over to the other table, and he gives his whole thing. And I'm like, thinking how he's like, okay, now we can be together, blah, blah, blah. And then I hear the guy say to the couple, oh, do you want to know about the dog? And they're like, oh, yeah, tell us about the dog. And all of a sudden, I'm interested. And I hear the guy start to tell the story. It's like, well, 8 weeks ago, my wife and I, here at the bed and breakfast, we're like the overflow place for the local vet, especially when they have really, really wounded animals. And so we got this dog 8 weeks ago. And when the dog came, he stayed underneath that table, and he points to a table maybe 10 yards away. So he stayed under the tablecloth. If you started to walk towards the table, you would hear a kind of growling that I guarantee you would make your hair stand up on your neck. And the only way I could get the food to him was take a broom, a push broom, and push the food and the water underneath the table. When the dog was done, the bowls came out empty. And that was it. And I had to open the door to let him out. And then I couldn't be there, and then the dog came back in. The next week, the dog put just the front of his face out so that just his eyes and his nose were out, and he tracked me wherever I went. If I turned towards him in any way, then he would do that fierce growl. Same thing with the food. The next week, about half of his body came out. Tracked me. Next week, he came out completely from the thing, although he would only eat when he was underneath the tablecloth all by himself. Next week, he started to follow me at about maybe 10 yards. As long as I didn't turn back, give him any attention, he was okay. And then the next week, he was about off my hip, maybe 2 feet. And then the next week, he just followed me, and he let me put my hand on the top of his head as long as I didn't turn towards it anyway. And then he says, and now I am writing the story down on a linen napkin. And my wife's like, you wanted the guy to leave, now you're writing his story on a napkin, dude. I'm like, yeah, no, it's going to be a great story. So then he says, and last week, and those of you who have dogs and love dogs, you'll appreciate this, and I hope the others of you may also. He starts a sentence, then stops it, and continues it with his physical action. He says, and last week, and he turns towards the dog, and the dog has this broad chest, and he reaches under the dog's chest and starts to do that, scratching the chest of a dog, and then he starts scratching his neck, and then the dog's like, and then the dog sort of just topples over. And the guy's just scratching the dog's chest. So he started the sentence with, and last week, and then he finishes the sentence as he's scratching the dog. He says, he let me love the hell out of him. Do you know how desperately, on behalf of God, I want to love the hell out of people? If hell is isolation, alienation, non-belonging, inability to laugh without constraint. I represent a God, for what it's worth, I represent a God that I deeply believe wants to love the hell out of you. And if you're courageous enough to make eye contact with me, I want to make eye contact because that makes this personal. This is personal for me. Love the hell out of you. Love the alienation out of you. Love the loneliness out of you. Love the self-consciousness out of you. Love the non-energy out of you. And last week, he let me love the hell out of him. I love that guy. I love the whole place. It was the most romantic, did I mention? Most romantic bed and breakfast west of Mississippi, dude. Last one. So I was getting a massage by the best massage therapist I've ever had in my life. He worked in the steel mills in Gary, Indiana, and then the steel mills closed. And they told the guys, hey, we'll pay so much money to re-educate you, because we're sorry you're losing your job. His wife was a massage therapist in La Salle, Illinois, right near a place called Starved Rock, which I went all the time. And his wife said, you should learn to do massage, because we have more people than I can ever do it. And he's like, no, I'm not really. And he works in the steel mill. Did I mention that? This dude looks like a steel mill. He's got the jeans going down. Are you with me now? He does not. You walk in for a massage therapist, you're like, oh, no. This guy's going to put you in a half Nelson. You're going to come out like broken. So I go in the first time, and I'm sort of intimidated, and he shakes hands with you like, this guy could eat me, And I was like, hi, my name is John. I'm like, hi, John. So then I go to the massage, best massage I ever got in my life. So I would go back like maybe once every 2 months, once every 3 months. And I went one time, and I was under an awful lot of stress. And actually, yeah, someone closest in the world to me, I had just brought to a 45-day rehab center. And if the rehab didn't work, in all likelihood, they would not survive. And so I was carrying all that in my body. And then I went to John, the steel mill massage guy. And so he starts doing the massage, and I don't know if you've had massages, but those people that know what they're doing, when they get to a place in your body that's all tight, then they stay there. And so he gets to this place in my back, and he starts to work it, and it's pretty painful for me. And I sort of want him to work it out, but I also want to protect it. So finally, I'm like, that's all I can take. So I don't like to talk or anything, so I just turn my head, and non-verbally with my face, I'm like, dude, that's good, thanks for trying, but you can leave that baby alone. And then he keeps going, and then I turn to him like, dude, I am paying for this. I am paying for this, and you are hurting me. And finally, he just keeps his thumb there, and I look at him, and then we make eye contact. And then John, the steel mill guy, he bends over and whispers really, really tenderly, but also unbelievably fiercely. It's like, hey, you can leave here with this pain if you want. But if you don't want to leave here with this pain, you have to breathe into it, you have to let me get to it, and you have to let it go. I'll give you 60 seconds to decide. And he keeps his hand right on this point of pain. You guys want to be reconciled? You want to move from hell to grace? Do we believe in a God that's willing to go into hell for us? Like, let me in. And then say to us, like, I don't think you belong in alienation, isolation, non-belonging, non-energy, non-life-giving sexuality, lack of connection, no passion, no engagement, taking tests that your heart is not in, etc., etc. And then God's like that mother, come with me. I'm going to bring you home, baby. I'm going to bring you home. You know where home is, don't you? It's in grace. Grace. And so my steel mill massage therapist, he nailed it. It was unbelievable. He had that thing, he had this finger in there. You can leave here with that pain if you want. If you don't want to leave here with this pain, you have to breathe into it, you have to let me get to it, and you have to let it go. The ironic thing is, so many people unconsciously choose to continue to reside in hell, in the presence of a God that's calling them home, calling them home, calling them home. And so, like all grace, it's not like Catholicism has the market cornered on it, like, we can sell grace or come to us, we have grace, nobody else has it. Like, grace is grace, it's not, we don't own it. And in the Catholic imagination, we have a language for it, we have a ritual for it called reconciliation. And basically, reconciliation is going to somebody that welcomes your story on behalf of God. And it's amazing what happens when you tell the truth about how you're hurting. It's almost like a sauna. And so we believe in this God that's desperate to get to us grace. We believe that whenever you experience reconciliation, that you remember who you are, like Cardinal Bernardine's guy, or that you are in the midst of love bigger than conflict, like my mom and her Catholic rosary and her caretaker and her Muslim prayer mat, or when the most important thing about the story of the dog is that he let me love the hell out of him. Nobody can make you get reconciled. You want to stay in hell? I'm just sad. I'm just unbelievably sad. I can't make you go to this other place, Grace. People choose to stay in hell because they're familiar with it, because they know what to say, they know how to react. Daughters of alcoholics marry alcoholics. I know how to handle this. I know how to manage this. Yeah, but you're in hell. Oh my gosh. I think my allotted time is completed. I think we have like a brief period of time. I'd love to, this is like taking a drink from a fire hydrant, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if it made any sense at all, if it was more confusing than helpful, if it intrigued, if it elicited questions or reactions of any kind. Let's take 5 minutes, and that'll get us to 6 o'clock, I guess 6 now. 5 minutes, and then we'll retire for dinner. Is that okay for people that know more than I do, like smart people here? You okay? Okay. So, any reactions, thoughts, comments, wisdom from your side of it? What do you think about reconciliation, grace, any of this? Thanks for starting us.
I found that really contagious, your enthusiasm. I enjoyed it. I also thought it was very productive how you presented sort of the issue of heaven and hell as something to be found on earth, and you emphasized the spiritual aspect of sin rather than the carnal aspect of sin.
Here, here.
I think that's a really productive way of introducing Catholicism to people who maybe don't know it.
Yeah.
But I almost was going to critique your some of the things you put under sin until I found in grace, under the grace section, the suffering through redemption.
Yeah.
And so that was a good thing. However, I'm wondering what your feelings are in terms of the agency of particular individuals who are caught up in habits. I mean that in the sense, how do you consider the will in terms of God? I mean, do you think of it in the Augustinian sense or the Schopenhauerian sense, if that's how you would say that, where a person's character is, not free in the sense that it can will itself, or that maybe through God you can will yourself towards certain virtues, such as that of seeking God. And so I don't know whether that's a question, but it's just something that came up in my mind. So.
Thank you. Mostly just your thoughtfulness, man. Really humbling to me. I guess, I would repeat one thing. And I'm sort of a street theologian, I'm trying to be here for actual people that we encounter. And I guess my lived experience is that our destiny is to live in that freedom characterized by those dimensions referenced in grace. And that while we make short-term decisions to behave in a way that would render us more likely to reside in that other place, I think that's an inauthentic, I don't think it's who we actually are, but we forget that. And so that we almost need to be, that's why that Cardinal Bernardine story really has a lot of theology in it. Like, no, I don't know who you are. Go ask that nurse, she'll remind you who you are. And I think who we actually are is that entity that lives freely in grace. Okay. And thank you for I love to think, the word enthusiasm comes from the word spirit. And I do not apologize for my enthusiasm. I'm with a lot of groups that don't share it. And that's okay. But I want to be of spirit. And part of spirit, it's not just being crazy, just being loud. But it is being animated, alive. Dry bones, get up and dance. When I'm with religious people that have no spirit for too long, I don't really trust it. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and your presentation. And also, I feel that I'm a person responsible for so many of the students here who commented on being here under duress, but I'm sure that I speak on behalf of them, saying thank you for your wisdom and your comments, and we're especially looking at issues of spirituality, and I feel like your discussion of reconciliation was really helpful. So
good, I'm just so delighted, and thank you for risking.
Thank you very much. We just all want to say thank you very much for your presentations.
You're welcome so much. Thanks for your accompaniment.
One of the things that I found in my life that I really want to do is to try and love everyone. So you talked about reconciliation, for yourself. How do you go about really going to do that for other people on a personal one-on-one basis? For all the people that you deal with on a normal basis, I don't know.
No, that's so good, man. I think once you've thought of yourself, why wouldn't you want it for everybody? If you really believe, so I know when I'm living in grace. Like literally, I know it, more or less. And that's where I want to live. Like, why would you not want to live there? And then, I'm given days of relationship with my wife, whatever. I find myself, we migrate back to this place of constraint and safety, basically. Constraint, safety, familiarity. That's what sin is. And so when I want to love people, basically, it's I want to be the mom that goes into hell and go like, you come with me. And some people you don't like when you do it that way. Some people you have great affection for. But once you believe that this is human beings' destiny to dwell here, then I think there's this deep impulse. Come on, people, let's live here. This is where we belong. There's a beautiful quote that says, "All attack is a plea for help." Once you know this, you begin to desperately discern what kind of help the attack is asking for. So when you're with somebody who's very aggressive, and you begin to think of it like that, like, hey, you know what? Nobody behaves like that who's not in hell. And so all attack is a plea for help. I love that, because it changes the way you go like, are you kidding me? You just cut me off. You just did this to me. Like, wow. You almost skip a lot of stages and go right to compassion. Wow. You must be. Anybody that's that aggressive has got to be hurting pretty badly. And to the extent that I have the discipline to invite you to release that, if you can leave here with this pain if you want. If you don't want to, you have to breathe into it, you have to let me get to it, and you have to let it go. I want to be John, the massage therapist, to as many people as possible. And that takes a lot of courage, especially when you're with people who are behaving in a way that's destructive, violent. That kid with the knives going down the hallway in Pennsylvania is like a walking hell. And if we knew the story behind, and people say he's an animal, he's not an animal. He's a little kid who was scared and hurt, and he was in hell. And nobody went to hell to get him, and so he acted out of hell. That's a powerful. And wouldn't it be great if somebody could have got to him? Sit down and come on. And that morning when he put those knives in his little backpack, somebody's going down. Basically, somebody's going down with me. All attack is a plea for help. And we didn't hear that, kid. And now there's people's intestines that are lacerated. Thank you for wanting to be a human being, walking through the world, fostering reconciliation.
Thank you.
Let's give one more round of applause.